Hello, and a huge welcome to everyone tuning in. You have landed right in the heart of the Fluency Lab. I'm your host, and today we are doing something a little different. We're stepping away from the mechanics of grammar and business reports to focus on something deeply human, yet surprisingly technical: the way we support each other when things fall apart.
It's great to be back in the lab. I was thinking about this on the way over. Most of us are trained in how to solve problems, right? We're engineers of solutions, but we are rarely trained in how to witness pain without trying to fix it.
That is the perfect setup for today's topic: the battle between empathy and sympathy. On the surface, they seem like synonyms. If a friend loses their job or goes through a breakup, we know we're supposed to offer one of them. But in the world of psychology and linguistics, these two words represent completely different emotional architectures.
Completely different. And getting them mixed up is where a lot of our communication failures happen. We think we're offering connection, but we're actually offering distance. We're going to break down the history, the neuroscience, which is fascinating, and the specific vocabulary that distinguishes the two.
Let's start with the history, because I think most people assume empathy is the older, more traditional concept. But that's not actually the case, is it?
No, it's actually the new kid on the block. Sympathy has been with us for centuries, rooted in the Greek sym, meaning together, and pathos, meaning feeling. It was heavily explored by philosophers like Adam Smith and David Hume in the 1700s as this idea of fellow feeling. But empathy? That word didn't even exist in English until 1909.
1909? That is incredibly recent. Where did it come from?
It was coined by a psychologist named Edward Titchener. He was translating the German word Einfühlung, which literally means feeling into. And here's the kicker. The German concept wasn't originally about people, it was about art. It described the way you project your own personality into an object, like looking at a leaning column and feeling the tension in your own muscles.
So empathy started as an aesthetic experience? That explains so much about the definition. It's about projection, projecting yourself into the experience of another. How do we distinguish that from sympathy in a modern context?
The most effective analogy comes from the researcher Brené Brown. She describes sympathy as standing on the edge of a deep, dark hole. You look down, you see someone suffering at the bottom, and you say, "Oof, that looks terrible. I am so sorry you were down there." You're acknowledging the pain, but you are maintaining a safe distance. You're on dry land, they're in the mud.
Right, it's feeling for someone. There's a separation. I am here, you are there, and I pity your situation.
Exactly. Pity is the cousin of sympathy. Now, empathy is different. Empathy is climbing down the ladder into the hole. You sit in the mud next to them and say, "I know what it's like down here. You are not alone." Empathy is feeling with someone. You have to access a part of yourself that knows that feeling, whether it's grief, shame, or fear, and resonate with it.
That sounds exhausting, to be honest. Is that why we default to sympathy? Because climbing into the hole takes too much energy?
It's not just energy, it's vulnerability. To show empathy, I have to remember my own pain. If you tell me you're failing at work, I can't just nod politely. I have to briefly relive the time I failed at work to truly connect with you. And scientifically, our brains are actually wired to do this. We have these things called mirror neurons.
I've heard of these. This was the discovery in the 1990s with the macaque monkeys, right?
Spot on. Giacomo Rizzolatti and his team in Parma, Italy, found neurons in the premotor cortex, specifically the F5 area, that fired both when a monkey grabbed a peanut and when it watched another monkey grab a peanut. But in humans, it goes deeper than motor actions. It hits the emotional centers.
So when I see someone crying, my brain is doing more than just processing visual data?
Much more. Functional MRI studies show that if I see you in pain, my anterior insula activates. That's the same part of the brain that lights up when I am in pain myself. So empathy isn't just a metaphor. My brain is literally running a simulation of your suffering. That is the feeling with mechanism.
That explains why empathy feels so heavy. We are physically simulating the distress. But let's bring this back to language. If empathy is about connection, why do we so often mess it up? What are the verbal traps we fall into?
The biggest trap is what I call the silver lining instinct.
It's when we try to put a positive spin on pain because we're uncomfortable with the darkness. The hallmark phrase of this is at least.
Oh, I am definitely guilty of this. At least you're young, you'll find another partner. Or at least it wasn't a total loss.
Right. At least you have your health. At least the cat lived. When you say at least, you're essentially saying, please stop feeling this way because it is making me uncomfortable. You're invalidating their pain. Empathy never starts with at least. Empathy says, I can see how much that hurts, or it makes sense that you are devastated.
It's the difference between fixing and witnessing. The at least phrase is an attempt to fix the emotion, to tidy it up.
Precisely. And here's where the vocabulary shift happens. Instead of offering a solution, you offer validation. Phrases like, I can only imagine how difficult this is, or I'm so sorry you're going through this, are powerful because they don't ask the person to change their state. They just allow the state to exist.
I want to challenge this idea for a moment, though. We're painting empathy as the superhero and sympathy as the villain, but is empathy always the right choice? There's a psychologist, Paul Bloom, who wrote a book called Against Empathy. That's a pretty provocative title.
It is, and Bloom makes a critical point. He argues that emotional empathy, that deep, visceral feeling with someone, is actually a terrible guide for moral decision-making. He calls it a spotlight. It shines very brightly on one person, usually someone who looks like us or is close to us, and leaves everyone else in the dark.
So, because I'm so focused on climbing into the hole with this one specific person, I might ignore the suffering of 100 other people who are further away?
Exactly. Empathy is innumerate. It cares more about one child stuck in a well than a statistic about thousands of people affected by a policy change. Bloom argues for rational compassion. This is where you care about the person and want to help them, compassion, but you don't necessarily let their emotional state hijack your own nervous system.
This seems especially relevant for professionals, doctors, nurses, therapists. If a surgeon felt deep, visceral empathy for every patient, climbing into the hole every single time, they'd burn out in a week.
You've hit on a major issue in healthcare, known as compassion fatigue. Although some researchers argue it should actually be called empathy fatigue. If you are constantly activating that anterior insula we talked about, constantly running simulations of trauma, your brain eventually shuts down to protect itself. That leads to burnout and depersonalization, where you treat people like objects because you simply can't afford to feel anymore.
So, in a professional setting, say a manager dealing with a stressed employee, we need a middle ground. We can't be cold and distant, but we can't be an emotional wreck on the floor with them.
Right. In the workplace, we use what I call professional empathy. It focuses on support rather than shared suffering. You validate the difficulty. I can see how frustrating this project failure is for you. Then you offer solidarity. I've got your back. Let's figure out the next steps together. You are supportive, but you remain the stable anchor. You don't jump into the water to drown with them, you throw them a line.
I love that distinction. I've got your back is such a great idiom for that. It implies protection and support without necessitating a shared emotional collapse.
It's one of the best, and it bridges that gap between the stiff, formal, my deepest condolences and the overly intimate, I'm crying with you. It says, I am competent, I am here, and I care.
Speaking of my deepest condolences, we touched on cultural differences earlier. You mentioned the stiff upper lip stereotype of the British versus the more expressive American style. How does that play out in the language of empathy?
It's fascinating. In American English, empathy is often maximalist. Oh my God, that is devastating. I'm so sorry. It's loud and visible. In British English, and often in other high-context cultures, empathy is found in the understatement. If a British friend says, well, that's a bit of a nuisance, isn't it? Regarding a major disaster, they aren't being cold.
Right. A bit of a nuisance could mean your house just burned down. You have to listen to the subtext.
Exactly. The empathy is in the shared understanding of the understatement. They are saying, this is so bad we can't even speak of it directly, so I will make a small joke to help us both survive it. It's a different mechanism, but the goal, connection, is the same.
This has been such a deep dive. We've gone from German aesthetics in 1909 to mirror neurons to workplace burnout. If our listeners take one thing away from this session in the Fluency Lab, what should it be?
I think it's the golden rule of empathy. Don't just do something. Sit there. In a culture that values action and fixing, the most radical thing you can do is simply bear witness to someone's pain without trying to change it. Listen for the whole. If they are in it, don't yell advice from the top. Just climb down, sit quietly, and say, "I'm with you."
And watch out for at least. Banish that phrase from your vocabulary this week.
Absolutely. Replace at least with "I hear you." It's a small shift in words, but a massive shift in relationship quality.
Well, we have reached the end of today's session. It's been intense, but honestly, I feel like I have a much better toolkit for being a friend and a human today. Thank you for guiding us through the nuance.
My pleasure. It's always good to dig a little deeper. Thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening, keep your ears open, your heart engaged, and your English flowing. We will see you in the next one.